What is going on, everyone? Today we are going to talk about infection control. So about 3 months ago, I got a question from someone asking more about an Epic infection control analyst. Just general information, what they do, and kind of stuff like that. I know I'm a little late, but better late than never. That was the impetus for the video today, to talk more about that, and that's pretty much it. Now, even though the original question was about a Epic infection control analyst, the content that I'm going to talk about today can certainly be generalizable to any type of infection control software. So there are actually many other tools out there for infection control. Some of the more popular ones that you guys might be familiar with is like Theradoc, Sentry 7, or Vigilance. So there are many other ones out there aside from the ones I listed. I only mentioned those because they are the ones I have experience with. So I want to make it clear that there's no way I'm endorsing any of them. I'm just mentioning them because I have experience with them. But like I said, going back to the original question, it doesn't matter what software you're using. The content I'm going to talk about today applies to all of them. So the content I'm going to talk about today will hopefully be kind of interesting to you guys because most of my audience is pharmacy, and this probably falls more in the category of nursing informatics, which you kind of see as we go down. It kind of makes sense why. But let's start off and just go very high level here and talk about what is infection control. To give a high level summary of what that is, it is basically the regulatory reporting of hospital-acquired infections, which we'll call HAIs for short, to the government. So when I'm talking about the government, I'm talking about the National Healthcare and Safety Network, or the NHSN, which is the reporting arm of the Centers for Disease Prevention and Control, which is the CDC. So it's also very important to define hospital-acquired infections, which are typically regarded as infections that are secondary to the patient's original condition and are preventable. So the patients don't usually come into the hospital with them. They are there for another reason, and then they develop an infection within the hospital that, again, is typically deemed as preventable. So that's going to be important for something else we'll talk about later. So that's typically the gist of infection control. Something else to know about is the subject matter experts within infection control. As with any other software out there, it's very important to know the individuals that you're developing the tools for, or you're basically a subject matter experts, or SMEs. And for infection control, your SMEs are infection preventionists, who are nurses by training. So I typically categorize infection control, or individuals that work as an infection control analyst, as nursing informatics. Hopefully that wasn't too long-winded, because the next parts could be more long-winded. I'm going to talk about what an infection preventionist do. You might be wondering why, because the title of the video is about infection control analyst. Well, I personally believe that it's very important to know what your SMEs do to design the tools that your SMEs will use. And my personal opinion is that, if you don't know what they do, you're going to design these horrible tools that don't fit their workflows, and it's just going to be stress, lots of stress. They're not going to like you. I think it's very important that you understand what they do, which is why I'm going to talk about what they do. Granted, this video is not meant to give you an exhaustive list of every single job responsibility that an infection preventionist does. It's just more so meant to give you a high-level overview of some of the things they do. Also, every organization might differ in some things, so one organization might have different job responsibilities than another organization. So going back to that definition, infection control is about reporting, regulatory reporting of HAIs to the government, right? And the beginning process of how they do this, it's typically called surveillance. Now, you can define surveillance as the continuous, systematic collection, analysis, and interpretation of health-related data. And basically what that means is infection preventionists use tools that help them identify patients that may be a potential hospital-acquired infection. And to give you guys a more concrete example, let's use one of these hospital-acquired infections that the NHSN cares about. catheter-associated urinary tract infections, which we'll call CAUTI. So basically, what they do is the infection preventionist goes out and finds patients that meet the NHSN definitions of what a CAUTI is. There are many details of what qualifies as one, but some of the key points are, like a patient that is in the hospital that has a urinary catheter in place for 2 consecutive days, followed by some sign or symptom like a positive urine culture or a fever. And I say potential because there are many things that may not be captured discreetly in the electronic health record. There are many things that may be in the provider's note. So there is some human intervention, which is why we have infection preventionists, to go and look through the chart, make sure that this patient actually qualifies and meets the definition of the CAUTI per NHSN. So the role of that infection preventionist basically goes, uses the tools, finds potential cases for one of these infections, goes through the chart, collects all the data and attributes that would qualify them as a CAUTI case, and collect it and kind of document it within a form. Nowadays, everyone's electronic, so it's usually electronic forms in which they collect all this information in, and they keep it in one place, and we will call that an infection case. So once they have all that data gathered, documented in an infection case, what they do is they take it and submit it to the NHSN via HL7's CDA, which is the Clinical Document Architecture. It's basically a defined file structure for where data should live. So every single time you submit a CDA, the patient, for example, the patient name will always live in field 1, patient age will live in field 2, the date of infection will live in field 3. So it's a very standardized way of submitting healthcare related information. And it's important because that allows for standardization and benchmarking across all these other organizations that are submitting this kind of data. Something else to note is why people even care about this, and there are many reasons why. I'm not going to go into it, but one that usually catches people's eyes is that hospital-acquired infections, because they're typically regarded as preventable, you get financially penalized for them when you have these at your organization. When calculating reimbursement for a hospital, the rate of hospital-acquired infections are analyzed. The rate of hospital-acquired infections is analyzed, and depending on what your rate is, your reimbursement is adjusted to reflect that. So that can translate to millions of dollars for the hospital. So this kind of work is very important for that purpose. And again, that's just the one that catches people's eyes. There's many other reasons within public health on why you should report this kind of data. We talked a lot about infection preventionists and the role of the infection preventionist. Now I'm going to very briefly, probably going to be very short, talk about what infection prevention analysts do. And you can kind of imagine, from what I've just described, much of the work is about reporting. And from an analyst perspective, I like to think of it in 3 big buckets of what you might be doing or what your job responsibilities might be. And number 1 would be more like reporting surveillance. So you create reports that will help infection preventionists find the patients that they want to work up. Number 2 would be about information gathering, a place for them to document evidence for why this patient qualifies for whatever hospital-acquired infection they're working up. So information storage and capture, so maybe some electronic forms, you'll be designing those kind of tools. And then the last piece would be information export. So you'll be creating the tools that will allow them to kind of package up all that information into that CDA format or document to submit to these third-party agencies like the NHSN. So that's kind of what I like to think about. Going back to each of these buckets to kind of give you guys a little bit more concrete examples. Let's use CAUTI for example, and say for report surveillance, what you want to do is create a tool. Usually it's a report that will find all the patients that have some type of objective measure that mirrors that NHSN definition. So for CAUTI, you know that you need a patient that's admitted that has a urinary catheter and a sign or symptom for CAUTI. So maybe a positive urine culture. So you'll create a report that will go and find those patients. You don't want your infection preventionist to go through every single patient in the entire hospital. You want to help them narrow down those patients that they work up. So that's the first part, and that'd probably be the bulk of what you would do, is creating reports that will help them narrow down which patients they should work up. So that's for that piece. The next piece would be, creating those electronic forms. What you're creating usually are forms that mirror what the NHSN cares about. Date of infection, date of admission, signs and symptoms that qualified them for that hospital-acquired infection. And different hospital-acquired infections have different things that they care about. So you're basically creating these forms that will allow the infection preventionist to document what it is that qualifies that infection case. So that's another piece. And the third piece is basically creating those tools that allow for exporting. So when you're doing this third step and you're creating these things that allow for creation of a CDA, many of the things are already available in the chart, like patient demographics, ADT information for admit, discharge, and transfers. So you want to map, for this specific field, pull it from this part of the patient's chart. So it helps create this nice document. And then sometimes, depending on your organization, there might be different file routing things that you might need to do. So some technical work on getting that stuff set up so it'll route to appropriate folders for your infection preventionist, so they can just simply, at the end of the month, take that data and just import it into NHSN. Alright guys, so I kind of wrapped up the video here. Hopefully that was helpful and maybe interesting. It, again, was meant to be a very high-level overview of infection control and what infection control analysts do. So if you do have more detailed questions or want to know more about this, let me know in the comments below, because whatever questions you guys have, someone else probably has the same questions. So definitely let them know, ask the questions below so other people can find the answers as well. Alright guys, until next time. Hey guys. Thanks for tuning in and watching the video. If you like the content, definitely hit the ImproRx button over to your left to subscribe, and definitely check out more videos over here to your right. Now, as always, if you have questions, comments, and even better, suggestions for future videos, definitely let me know in the comments below. Otherwise, until next time guys.